Like, I wanted to slap him upside the face and tell him, get yourself together, man. Seriously. Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly, and today I'm going to be ranking every single horror book I've ever read in my entire life. Now, traditionally, horror is a genre that I tend to avoid because I don't enjoy being scared. I don't enjoy having my anxiety rifled with. I'm somebody who lives with enough anxiety already that I don't need to, welcome anxiety into my life. And usually horror is what does it. But over my lifetime, I have read a horror book or two, and I decided to rank them all with you, especially since Halloween is right around the corner. All right, so if you are here and you also love books and reading and you enjoy these kind of ranking videos, I would encourage you to subscribe and stick around. Now let's just go ahead and get into the meat of this video. What I forgot to say in the introduction is that I'm going to end with the book that is not horror, but gave me the most nightmares. I'm gonna leave that to the very end. Okay, so starting at the bottom, surprisingly on this list, there wasn't any book that I vehemently hated, even though I don't enjoy being scared. So starting at the bottom, it's going to be Salems Lot by Stephen King. I read this with my husband at the time, not my husband at the time. I read this at the time with my husband, and and we read it together. And if you don't want to know anything about Salem's Lot, then skip 10 seconds ahead, because I'm going to tell you that I did not know that this was, warning, this was a vampire novel. And so as I was reading it, I had no idea that this was going to be playing with the tropes of vampires. And so to my great surprise, I was like, oh, there are vampires flying around this town. I enjoyed the book. It was my first Stephen King. It was a quick, sort of brain candy-ish read, and it wasn't actually that scary. So yeah. And then the next book, unfortunately, is going to be another Stephen King, and that is Firestarter. Now, Firestarter is the book that I had heard Stranger Things was based off of. And so at the time, I was very, very into Stranger Things, and I decided that I wanted to read the book where it originated. And I read Firestarter, and this is where I realized that Stephen King is really good at building suspense, but for me, didn't give a satisfying climax or falling action. And so at this point, I decided that Stephen King is not for me. Moving up the list, we have Eliza Clark's Boy Parts, which tells the story of an artist and photographer, Irina, who takes explicit photos of men, and that's her thing. And it is really her unhinging and her kind of going down the rabbit trail of insanity. And it was a weird book. It was a bit much for my poor heart. I did find it immensely readable. It didn't give me nightmares, but I felt kind of icky after I read it, and I don't like when books do that. The next book is one that I read very recently. It's actually a graphic novel, and when I mentioned that it wasn't that scary, a couple of people who actually read horror said that that book was frightening for them, and I was like, oh, well, I guess it was scarier than I thought. But it is actually Emily Carroll's Through the Woods. I picked this book up for my 30 books in 30 days, which I did in September, and I didn't know that it was a horror graphic novel until I read the first story, and then I was like, oh, this is definitely horror. The reason why it's somewhere not at the bottom but in the middle of this list is because I really liked Emily Carroll's art, and for horror short stories, it actually worked really well. But again, I just don't really enjoy sitting in that space where I'm scared. So yeah, but it was good. Oh, the next book I have a lot of mixed feelings about. I own this book. I read it in undergraduate school. No one told me it was horror, but it was weird. And that is Patrick Susskind's Perfume, which tells the story of a man who has a really heightened sense of smell, can smell everything, but has no scent of his own. and he ends up going down this trail of not being a good person, and that is the understatement of the year. I had this book spoiled the heck out of for me in that class in undergraduate school. And I think I carry like some bias against this book ever since. Now, the writing is gorgeous, I will tell you that. This is a very literary horror novel, but I don't really want to revisit it because I don't want to be back in this weird world of just intense, gross scents being described in minute detail. I don't know, but I keep it around because I read it in college and I have a really hard time getting rid of it. And there's a part of me that's like, maybe I'll read you again someday. The next read is actually a short story. It's a Victorian short story. And I really like the way that the story plays out. And it is actually the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I always get that mixed up. Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And what it does is that it is a woman that is seemingly devolving into insanity. And I really quite like that trope. And what I liked about this short story is that you don't quite know if she is going insane, if there's something in her brain that is making her a bit crazy, or if she's being gaslit by the people around her, primarily her husband. And so it really plays with that fine line, and I think that that's why it's classified into the horror genre. But what I like about this is that it does it really well and it's really effective. Next up, we have a children's classic, or like modern classic, I would say, and it is Neil Gaiman's Coraline, which tells the story of Coraline who moves into this neighborhood and things get strange really quickly. First of all, the people around her don't call her by her correct name, and then she kind of enters into a different dimension almost. And this is a good book. It's definitely really dark, but interestingly, I love the movie. Actually, my older son, when he was younger, the only movie he would sit through was Coraline. And we were like, oh my goodness, do we have a little mini Tim Burton on our hands? like, is our child gonna grow up to create some dark movies? That was our thinking, because he would watch this movie over and over and over again. And when we were watching it, of course, like my husband and I were getting sick of watching it. We're like, we've watched this here, there, and everywhere. We could probably quote you the whole movie. It is enough. And then we found out something that really shifted our mindset with the movie. And we found out that the whole thing was done in stop motion animation. That Coraline as a movie is an incredibly impressive piece of art. Like, there are parts where Coraline's hair is just like floating and you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe somebody like did all of those little movements to make her hair move. It is really a really impressive movie. And now every time I watch it, it doesn't bother me anymore, because I just sort of awe over the amount of work the people put in to make it so detailed and work so well. But anyways, the book is good too, but I actually think the movie works better. Yeah, scary, enjoyable, and definitely worth making this list. Okay, coming in at number 3, we're in my top 3. I read this year and I liked it. It was one of those books that everybody really hyped up for me and said that I was gonna love and it was gonna be amazing, and it was really good. And there were some things that were done incredibly well, and then there were like some things where I was just like, I don't know. But again, take this with a grain of salt, because I don't really like horror, and that is From Hell. It's a very boring book to look at, but it's the graphic novel From Hell, written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Eddie Campbell. Like, maybe I'll show you something from the inside that's a little more exciting. Okay, so there we go. This is our signed edition of From Hell. So From Hell tells the narrative of Jack the Ripper and so much more. so much more. So like immediately you're already sitting in this space where you're following a serial killer, somebody who I think during Victorian times killed women of the night, prostitutes. Anyways, and so immediately you're kind of in this space where you know that like bad things are happening, and then the whole thing goes off the rails truly off the rails. And so, you know, it's one of those things where I'm like, I can really appreciate the storytelling. I can really appreciate like getting in the mind of Alan Moore, who has like a very specific thing that he wants to do, and he does it so well. But yeah, it's one of those like, I'm glad I read it, but I don't know if I'll ever read it again. You know, that kind of thing. So the next book is going to be one that I actually read very, very recently this month, and it was Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Valente. Now, this, I would say that going into this blind, especially since it's an incredibly short read, is the best way to go. And it really is, it's like horror adjacent. There are horror elements to it, but I don't think that it's like seeped in that sort of horror-ness. What am I talking about? I don't know much about horror. Y'all can tell me if you've read Comfort Me with Apples. Is it horror? It was classified under horror in Storygraph, okay? But I even everything that Storygraph classified as horror, I didn't even include on this list because I was like, that's not really horror. But this is like horror-esque. And it tells the story about Sophia, who has a very perfect life until she doesn't, you know? And you're like, okay, so what's happening here? There's something off. Let's figure out what's off about it. What I liked about it is that if you don't want any spoilers and you want to go in blind, then skip like 30 seconds ahead. I'll try and put a timestamp down below. So spoilers. What I liked about it is that ultimately it was connected to a biblical theme, and I like got it right away, or I got it at the end, but then the whole story really clicked into place for me, and I really enjoyed that, and it made a lot of sense to me. And so I didn't sort of sit there and like spin my wheels like, what is this book about? What is this story about? I don't know. I have to like give it a reread. I was like, oh, that was cool. I see you, Catherine. I feel you. I know what you're doing, and it worked, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. Also, Comfort Me with Apples has like the purplest prose I have ever read in my entire life. Wow, she is like purple prose to the max. It is like vibrant. All right, our final book is going to be one that I read this month. Actually, I just finished it a few days ago, and I don't know, it was very, very different than I thought it was going to be. It's another Victorian novel, or Victorian adjacent novel. The reprint was printed in Victorian times. You probably know what I'm talking about already. And that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now, here's the interesting thing. I really, 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 really hated a character in this book. Like vehemently, like I wanted to slap him upside the face and tell him, get yourself together, man. Seriously. Because like I was so irritated by him. And then I was like, you know, it takes a really good writer to get in and amongst me so much, and to get me to like have such a vitriolic reaction to a character. And so I kind of like slow clapped Mary Shelley for getting me to have like such like just huge feelings about one of her characters. And let me tell you, it wasn't the monster, okay? But why it's at the very top is that there is a lot of gothic, scary horror elements to this book. I mean, it wasn't surprising in that, like, you know, nobody really gets hurt. Nothing really happens. No. Stuff happens in this book. Why it's at the top is that it explores so many philosophical ideas, and through that exploration, the horror of it all is presented. I think one of the main questions is like, what happens if we play God, and the consequences to those actions. And I just thought that was a really fascinating concept to explore. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg with this book. I mean, there was just so many good things about it. And I really can appreciate all of the literature that came after this. The structure of this book is very, very much influenced a lot of literature afterwards, primarily in my mind, Mary Norton's The Borrowers, but that's, again, the tip of the iceberg. It's the very top, like the very just beginning of how this book has influenced literature. And I was just really surprised. And so, you know, for a horror book, I think that if it was always like this, if we were always exploring a really cool philosophical idea, then I think I would be really here for the genre, but that's not really what the genre is all about. But yeah, Frankenstein, very, very top of the list. For those of you who are still with me, The book that actually gave me the most nightmares, I looked it up. I even was like, Google, is this a horror book? Because I was like, I remember this book through the nightmares it gave me. It was really horrifying. And I've actually decided that this author is not for me. And no, it is not William Faulkner. William Faulkner. Gosh, I just felt like I said a cuss word right now. But anyways, it is actually Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. Now, this tells the story, it's historical fiction, it is magical realistic, and Colson Whitehead uses the horrors that were done to African American slaves, black slaves in the US, and like explores that idea or those ideas of the trauma just that slaves went through, and it's so brutal. It is one of the most brutal books I've ever read, and as I was reading it, I mean, every night I had a nightmare. It took me about a week to read, and let me tell you, all 7 days I had a nightmare. And then I was like, won the Pulitzer Prize. I was like, this is my thing. I want to enjoy and understand like why it won the Pulitzer Prize, its contribution to literature, Colson Whitehead's writing style. And then I read his other book, The Nickel Boys, which I have somewhere, but I have a lot of books stacked up, and I feel like there is an avalanche of books that's about to happen if I moved anything. So anyways, so then what happened was that I read his other book, which was also a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Nickel Boys, and I realized that Colson Whitehead is really, 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 really good at building tension. And for good reason, because the things that he explores, the things that he's writing about, the events that he's writing about included are true events, but sort of twisted on their head that happened in the US. And so I think that his work is important. I can really appreciate what he's doing and the language that he's using. I mean, his language is really tight. But I have decided that I don't enjoy being in the space where I am just deeply frightened, and that I don't want to turn the next page because I don't want to see what's written on it, because I don't want my anxiety to be triggered. And so I've decided that Colson Whitehead is not for me. But yeah, if you're looking to be scared out of your wits and to just like be in that space where you're frightened, yeah, then, The Underground Railroad is definitely going to be a book for you. All right, you all. Well, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in my next one. Bye, guys.